Hello, I hope you're doing well today. Today we will be discussing the lesson plan template and taking a close look at the standards and the essential questions part. Our template has at the beginning a place for you to put the title and your grade level and the date or of the learning experience. For example, if you write it on Friday, but you're going to do it on Monday, then you should put the date of the learning experience. In other words, the date you teach. Curriculum standards and essential questions or I can statements are what we're going to be talking about today. So when we just talk about a lesson, that kind of means different things depending on who you are and what program you're in. If you're secondary education, a lesson means everything that you do from bell to bell. So it's the activities that you have students do the minute they walk into the door for your class period. And it ends at the end of the class period. So it's bell to bell. So even if, for instance, you're going to be working on the same objective for 3 days, that would be 3 different lesson plans, not one plan for all 3 days. So there shouldn't ever be a 3-day lesson plan or a 4-day lesson plan. That's called a learning segment. Elementary, it's basically the same thing except you probably don't have bells. These are going to be the learning activities that you plan for a particular subject area that you'll be completing during a set time period. So your math lesson, your reading lesson, if you've got groups, you might have a different plan for each group. It just depends on how you set it up. A learning segment is a term that describes 3 or 4 or 5 lessons together. For example, the learning segment may be on weather. Lesson 1 might be clouds. Lesson 2 could be wind. Lesson 3 might be storms. Goals and standards. So your lesson plan should focus on goals and standards, and you need to know what those are prior to writing your lesson plan. What is the difference between standards, goals, and objectives? Well, as you can see here, it's very clear that objectives help you complete the standard. Standards are often quite large and very general, and sometimes they're so large and general that you could work on the standard the entire year, and that's very true, especially with some of the Common Core that I've seen. Objectives are taken from the standard. So let's say it is a goal of mine to go to the Philippines. First, I would do some research on where to go to the Philippines. So that would be an objective, to complete research. Then I would get the plane ticket. So that's another objective, to purchase plane tickets. So again, what are the steps I need to get to my goal, the Philippines? Objectives are taken from the standard and students reach the standard. I want you to start thinking of standards as goals. So this is the ultimate goal, and it might take many lessons to reach this goal, or you might just be working on it in one lesson. So when we look at that, standards are the same as goals. Let's talk about the relationship between goals and objectives. It's the same way. It's your objectives that help you reach the goals. Goals are often very large and general, and the objectives help us get there. Goals are very well expressed in an essential question or an I can statement. So can you imagine trying to read some of those, writing all those standards on the board for your students? I mean, what student's going to read that? I mean, even if they could read it, they're like, what? What? I mean, they don't want it's just gobbledygook, and a lot of it is written in educational jargon that's not meaningful. So if you're wanting to share with parents or with students about what you're doing, you need to speak in more terms that they'll understand, and that's why we have essential questions and I can statements. Which one you use, whether you use essential question or an I can statement, has to do with um, where you're teaching or what level. I can statements are really good for elementary, early childhood, and even some middle grade classes. And essential questions are good for high school, middle school, and maybe some upper elementary classes. So goals are expressed in an essential question or an I can statement, and the importance of that is that you think about the Bloom's verbs that I've got here. I've got create, evaluate, analyze, apply, understand, and remember. Well, what does that mean? So when you're thinking, you're often going to have your standards written with these. But when you're writing your essential questions and your I can statements, you're going to be much more specific, and you're going to be thinking about what they're actually going to do. So what are some of the important understandings that you want the students to develop? And remember that we're not going to just talk about a list of facts, that they should name the 3 reasons of the blah, 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 and none of that. I mean, just go beyond that. And when you are using, taking the standard, which, like I said, which probably is using the Blooms, you might find that you want to use different types of verbs for your I can statement or your essential question. So, for example, knowledge, the student, you could put, I can label the parts of the cell. Categorize. I can, let's do an essential question. How do we categorize animals? That's an example of an essential question. So these we would pull out of the standard. So looking at your curriculum standards, you get those from your mentor. You ask your mentor which ones you need, and then your essential questions you want to get for the ones that that are going to come straight from here, and then your learning objectives will be next. So the essential question and the I can statement, the importance of those is that that's how you're going to communicate to the students the standard. And it's how you're going to communicate to the students your goals and what particular parts of the standard that you're teaching. So it's all going to kind of come together. Your curriculum standards are going to lead you to the essential questions, and which is going to take you down to where you're working on your learning objectives. So how could these be written as an essential question or an I can statement? Let's look at this one. Improving cardiovascular health. Just think for a minute about what kind of essential question you could come out of that. Pronouncing AR words. The historical and emotional value of self-portraits. Writing a persuasive essay. So you might have an essential question. What are some ways we can improve cardiovascular health? That might be what you'd write on the board instead of putting the whole standard. Pronouncing AR words. You can write, I can read, and then put your AR words up there. Historical and emotional value of self-portraits. That would probably be an essential question. It might not be. If it's elementary, you could say something like, I can describe this self-portrait. I can tell about myself with my self-portrait. I can make a self-portrait. I can draw a self-portrait. I can show my feelings. I don't know. It's kind of hard to think in that terms. Writing a persuasive essay. So that's pretty broad. What are parts of the persuasive essay that you're teaching in that class, and what would be some good essential questions that you could ask? So that's it for now. What we'll be doing is just simply going through bit by bit on um, the part of the lesson plan template. So keep watching, and I'll see you again soon.